Hello, Westbrook. Hope you guys are doing really good today. I'm excited to talk to you guys about James 1:21 to 25. It's going to be great. So let's just dig right in. So today is the first time we've ever really entered into one of the stickier points of James. And often people have described James as getting worryingly close to a theology of works-based salvation. In other words, some people have thought that James is saying that you have to perform well enough or prove your faith in order to be saved. Doing works equals going to heaven or salvation. And actually, many early reformers, particularly Martin Luther, really had a problem with James. In fact, he called it the Epistle of Straw. And on a personal level, reading verses like what we're going to read in James always made me feel that being a Christian meant that I can't make any mistakes and that I have to be perfect if I want God to be happy with me and if I want to have a chance of making it to heaven. And I'm sure that if you've ever thought about faith like this, then you've probably felt that being a Christian can be incredibly discouraging and maybe even hopeless. When in my case, this was a struggle that I had for a long time when I first decided to start following Jesus. And I felt that there was genuinely no way that I was going to fully live up to the standard that it seemed like these passages were setting for me. I knew full and well that I wasn't perfect and that I had a lot of growing up to do. And I'm not saying that I'm perfect even now. In fact, none of us are really perfect. And that all of us have things to grow up in and to grow in. But the problem was that all of these ideas, the idea that I couldn't make any mistakes or else it was done for me, made me really worried and afraid of trying to reach out to find help for the things that I struggled with. Because I was afraid that I was the only one that needed to grow up and had made mistakes and needed help. But it made me feel that even at times that I couldn't reach out to other people because I would be condemned. And thankfully, God has grown me and has put me in communities and with people that have stepped beside me in many things. And namely that the Holy Spirit has been with me the whole time in the midst of all of my imperfections and the things that I needed to grow up in, and has helped me grow through all of those things and continues to do so. And the more that I've studied James, the more I've realized that that's what James is talking about, and he's definitely not talking about this kind of discouraging and hopeless, legalistic faith that it seems like he might be talking about. There are so many places where James has been talking about things in a way that I'm just not used to. And the truth is because it doesn't sound like Paul. I think that in evangelical churches, we preach a lot of Paul, and Paul kind of becomes the standard for many definitions and many understandings about things in the New Testament and in the things that we teach. And so that when things don't sound like Paul, it confuses us and we get mixed up. And generally that leads to a lot of misunderstandings about James because James is not Paul. And he uses words and terms in a different way. In particular, if we think about what we talked about last week, James uses the word of truth where Paul would use gospel. James, in this section of verses, uses the term law, where Paul would probably talk about identity as a new believer, or the law of love, basically, which we'll talk about in a bit. But in general, this whole passage actually sounds very similar to something that Paul says in Ephesians 4:1. And in that passage, Paul says, "I, therefore, a prisoner of the Lord, urge you to walk in a manner worthy of the calling to which you've been called." And that's basically what James has been talking about since verse 19, probably in general all the time. But it's really about identity. It's about who you are and what that means for the way that you live, especially if you follow the King of Love, who has given us a way of love to live. But let's read the text and see what it says, and let's dig into it. So James 1:21-25. Therefore get rid of all moral filth and the evil that is so prevalent, and humbly accept the word planted in you, which can save you. Do not merely listen to the word and so deceive yourselves. Do what it says. Anyone who listens to the word but does not do what it says is like someone who looks at his face in the mirror and after looking at himself goes away and immediately forgets what he looks like. But whoever looks intently into the perfect law that gives freedom and continues in it, not forgetting what they have heard but doing it, they will be blessed in what they do. So let's break the text down. And let's start with 1:21. And we have to remember, James loves the command language. He's been using it since the beginning of the letter, and he's using it now very heavily. He uses the command, the imperative, twice in 1:21. First in the beginning, where he says, therefore, get rid of all moral filth, and so on. What we should be getting out of that is, therefore, you must get rid of all moral filth and evil. You must. And the next command that we see is actually halfway through, where he says, and humbly accept the word planted in you, which can save you. That's not just a recommendation or an encouragement. He's commanding them, saying, I command you, you must humbly accept the word planted in you, which can save you. And there's also a little bit extra at the end of that verse that I think we need to clarify as well. At the end, in the NIV at least, it says, which can save you. But if you'll notice in other translations, it says, which can save your soul, or which can save your life. I think that we need to make it even more wooden and expand it out and represent the Greek a little bit better by saying, which is able to save your life. And if we understand it that way, we see that James is not implying that it's possible that you won't be saved. He's saying that this word of truth, which is planted in them, is able to save them. It can save. It's indicating that salvation is accessible. That the word of truth is accessible to them, and the saved life is accessible to them. So he's not putting a barrier in salvation. He's saying that it's open to you. And really, the whole verse in 1:21, it kind of boils down to this. He's commanding his readers to accept that there is a level of corruption and filthiness in them that they probably crave. What Paul would call being fallen, of the world, all of those different things. And that he's commanding that they reject that way of thinking, those desires, that identity that they once had. And the next thing that he's saying is that they must acknowledge, be humble themselves, and acknowledge that all of that stuff that they might have once taken pride in, that they might have once loved to do, all of that corrupt, bad stuff, they need to humble themselves and acknowledge that was bad, and that only this new way of life that they've stepped into, this way of following Jesus, is going to give them life, is going to save them. So let's talk about 1:22. And I'll read it again. Do not merely listen to the word and so deceive yourselves. Do what it says. You hear the word do in there a lot? That's imperative stuff. It's a lot of commanding there too. So basically he's saying that people who refuse to acknowledge that they need to change, that all of this bad stuff in the past needs to be rejected, that they need to start on a new trajectory in their life towards basically the way of life that God is calling them to, he's saying if they refuse to acknowledge that, they are deceiving themselves, and that they are that they're not doing it. And he expands on this in 1:23, where he says, anyone who listens to the word but does not do what it says is like someone who looks at his face in the mirror. And so he's starting this new analogy to explain what he means. And I'll carry on into 24 as well. And after looking at himself, goes away and immediately forgets what he looks like. So he's saying that this person that he talks about in verse 23, this person who refuses to listen to the word, who hears it and maybe even pays lip service to it, but then doesn't acknowledge its implications, that person is like this person that looks in the mirror and totally forgets what they look like after, which is just ridiculous if you think about it. And let's move to 25. But whoever looks intently into the perfect law that gives freedom and continues in it, not forgetting what they have heard, but doing it, they will be blessed in what they do. So he's elaborating on this mirror analogy with some final clarifying points. That if they are evaluating their lives in terms of this perfect law that gives freedom and actually pressing forward in that direction, that trajectory, that they will be blessed. And this is the sticky point because, because we're so fixated on Paul's language, we hear the word law and we think, that's bad. That means legalism. That means going back. That means nuts. That means death. All of those different things. James does not use the term law in the same way. And really what he's actually saying when he says this perfect law that gives freedom, he's referring to the way that Jesus basically said you fulfill all of the law by loving God and loving your neighbor as yourself. The golden commandment, whatever you want to call it, is what he's referring to. And we know this because if you look at 2 verse 8, he says, if you really keep the royal law found in Scripture, love your neighbor as yourself, you are doing right. So there again, he's saying law, and then he's attributing it directly to that particular verse, which is in Leviticus, love your neighbor as yourself. So he's not talking about the Old Testament law and going back to the Old Covenant and all of the things that Paul is very afraid of. He's talking about what Jesus commanded his followers to, which is a way of the life of love. The life of loving God, the life of loving others, and just interacting with the world in the way that Jesus did, in the loving way that Jesus did. But you might ask, well, what does this mean? And I think that throughout the rest of this letter, we're going to realize and explore more of what that means in a variety of different ways. But in general, we need to understand that kind of love that they're talking about is putting the other first. It's the denial of the self. It's denial of being selfish and putting your interest first and putting that of another first. In particular, you love God and so you put God first. But this can even include seeing ourselves as God would want us to see ourselves. So it's quite big and it's quite expansive, but in general, God comes first and we look to him and we let God guide us. We follow Jesus, and Jesus determines the order and the quality and the direction of our lives. But then if we want to talk about loving other people, it's putting other people first. And if you think maybe even like what Paul says in Galatians 5 about the fruit of the Spirit, all of those things fulfill the law of love. And he even says that in that passage as well. Kindness, gentleness, peace, patience, self-control, understanding, all of these different things enable you to prioritize the needs of others and to live in a way where you're not living in a selfish manner. You're not living in a way that destroys and tears down other people and even destroys and tears down yourself. You're prioritizing the needs of other people. People are blessed when you are kind and compassionate to them. People are blessed when when you walk in integrity and in humility. The point is that the law of love goes much deeper than a set of arbitrary commands, and it's more, this whole idea of law is more than just fulfilling requirements. We have to remember that James is referring back to Jesus, and both of them are Jewish, and so they think of a lot more than what we're used to thinking about when it comes to law. The word Torah in Hebrew, it encompasses so much more than just a law code. It's wisdom, it's a way of life, it's a social order, it's the way that you interact with other people and your God and the world around you. So it makes sense that he uses that term. He just redefines what the law is. Well, Jesus did. And basically goes much deeper than what the Old Testament law ever could, which is something that Paul even says. And basically, this law of love gets at the core of how we interact with God, other people, and the world around us. It goes so deep, and it's way more extensive than any law code could ever be. Think about it. And if you think about it, it encompasses every situation possible. This ethic and this new way of life, this way of love, affects, infidelity with your spouse. It speaks to how you use substances, how you use your money, how you the ethics of your business dealings, how you treat the land as a farmer. It's everything. It's all of it. It's crazy. And so that's why it's the perfect law, the law of freedom. And it gives freedom because it's not just about a constraining set of things. It's about a way of life that, as James says at the end of verse 25, will bless them in what they do. They will be blessed in what they do in doing it. And so it's the freedom to be blessed again. It's the freedom to be away from all of this corruption and what James says is moral filth and evil that tears us and everything else around us down, into something that builds us up and blesses us, actually. And so I want to talk a little bit more about James's mirror analogy. And I think it's kind of funny because I was thinking to myself when I was writing this sermon, oh man, what's a good analogy to explain what James is talking about here? And I was thinking that literally as I was reading the analogy that he gives to explain what he's saying. And so I kind of laughed to myself because I was, well, obviously, James is doing, he's using the perfect metaphor for what he's trying to say. And the genius in using the mirror as a metaphor is that it implies and refers to identity. If you think about it, the mirror, at least on a visual level, reflects back to you what you are. And so innately, the whole discussion of a mirror and looking in the mirror is going to have to do with identity, who you are and what that means for what kind of life that you live. And we need to understand that in James's mind, along with everyone else in his time, who you are is inherently connected to what you do. So for James, a Christian, a follower of Jesus, is a person who loves God and other people, a person who lives in the way of love. And this is where this analogy hits really hard. And it's he's using a lot of irony here. And if you think about it this way. He's using irony to make it ridiculous, the idea of being one thing and then doing something that is not a part of who you are. It's like me, and you can see me now. I have short and dark and straightish hair, and I'm acknowledging it to you, or I'm looking in a mirror and I'm saying I have short and dark and straightish hair. But then the second I walk away from the mirror, I go out to Madeline and I say, Madeline, I have long, curly, bright green hair that stands straight upwards. Well, of course, Madeline would look at me and say, are you okay? Have you hit your head? Is everything... did you inhale some fumes? Are you all right? Because it's ridiculous. And that's the point. James is using irony, very, very much, a lot of irony, to make the point that it's crazy. You live in alignment with who you are. And so because he's not saying that they're not Christians. He's saying that it's not fitting for them to live in any way other than what the goodness and the greatness that they are called to, the goodness that is inherent in who they are now, the trajectory of life that is loving God and loving other people and all this different stuff. He's not if you look really deeply in the text, he's not questioning whether the people that he's writing to are saved. He's just saying, you need to think about it. It's ridiculous to say you're one thing and be the other thing. I know that you are followers of Jesus. I know that you are part of our spiritual family, that you are a child of God just like I am. He's saying, I know that. So understand that means something for for the way that you live your life. So let's distill all of this into a simple and memorable kind of point. And for me, really, the real question that comes out of this passage is, who are you? If you're a follower of Jesus, are you living in alignment with who you are? And if not, you're having an identity crisis. I think that's the best way to put it in our terms. And you need to just take a step back and evaluate your desires. And the thing that you need to understand is that there is a way forward. That there is always a way forward. There is a way to walk deeper into who you are, into being a doer and not a hearer, into being someone who looks in the mirror and looks into that perfect law and continues in it. And obviously, James says that this is not an impossible task to walk forward in this direction. And I think implied in the fact that he's even acknowledging and talking about this, he's saying there's probably things in your lives that your guys are going to need to work on. And the point is that you must work on it. And that's the point. It's not about whether you're saved. It's about who you are and whether you're living in alignment with that, and that you must be in the direction of living deeper into that perfect law that gives freedom, basically. So, who are you? If you're a follower of Jesus, are you living in alignment with who you really are, at the core of who you are? If not, you need to take a step back, evaluate, think through your desires and what you think is important. And if you are realizing that there might be some level of inconsistency, or if there might be some desires in there that are unsavory, that you bring those out, and that you do, I guess, you walk forward into whatever God would want you to do to work through that stuff. And I think that's what's really important about this. It's about who you are and being who you are, rather than whether or not you're saved. So I'm refreshed to hear this. It's challenging. It's challenging for all of us, but I'm refreshed because I know, as much as you know in your own hearts, that I want to continue to walk in the direction of growth, walk in the direction of being this follower of Jesus and growing more into what Jesus is, into Christ likeness, into being a child of God, into being a part of his family. I want that, and I know that there's things that I need to grow up in, that all of us need to grow up in. And my encouragement to myself, to you, is just we must keep going. Let's keep going, because what's ahead of us in that direction is blessing. James says they will be blessed in what they do. So let me pray for us, and we'll say bye. Father, I thank you so much for this time. I thank you for the people listening online today. I pray that you would bless them. I pray that you would be with them, you'd give them health, and give them wisdom by your Spirit to evaluate the desires that are not in line with who they really truly are as your children, as your followers. Give them hope. Give them all of that they need to move forward in the direction of who they are, who they really are, and just bless them in that. And give them strength, and give them and show them how blessed it is just to walk in your way. I pray this in your name, Jesus. Amen. Goodbye, guys. I hope to see you very soon. We all miss you here, and God bless. We'll see ya. Thanks for watching. Connect with us on Facebook or YouTube with the link in the description below. Stay tuned for more remote and connected video sermons dropped every Sunday on the Westbrook Community Church Facebook page and YouTube channel. Have a good week and God bless.